Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a really fascinating AP Human Geography briefing document.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It's titled Cultural Patterns and the Geography of Human Identity. And the central mission of our deep dive today is to explore a concept that honestly, it completely shifts how you view the physical world around you.
It really changes your perspective.
Right. We are looking at how our internal beliefs, our cultural practices, and, our very identities, they don't just stay trapped inside our heads.
No, they go.
They literally dictate the physical organization of the spaces around us. We're talking about the invisible forces that shape the buildings we walk past, the streets we drive on, and even the friction between different groups sharing the same map.
And by understanding that spatial distribution of human identity, we can actually unlock the why behind global stability and global conflict.
Exactly.
Because we walk through these culturally modified spaces every single day, right?
Right.
But we're often completely blind to the historical and psychological blueprints that built them.
Oh, absolutely.
When you grasp the concepts from this briefing, you stop seeing a city street or a rural town as just, a collection of infrastructure. You start seeing it as a living, breathing record of human psychology. It's basically culture poured into concrete.
Culture poured into concrete. I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the very foundation of how we shape the landscape.
Mhm.
Geographers make a highly critical distinction between two interconnected concepts here.
Right. Placemaking and sense of place.
Yes. Think of placemaking as the hardware and sense of place as the software. Placemaking is the physical act of designing and defining spaces to reflect a cultural identity.
It's the tangible stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
It's modifying the landscape to suit the needs and the values of a specific population. You can see this everywhere if you know what to look for. It's the construction of specific architectural styles, the intentional layout of streets, or the creation of dense ethnic neighborhoods.
Picture walking through a major metropolitan area, right?
Yeah.
And you cross the threshold into a neighborhood like Chinatown or Little Italy. The transformation there, it isn't subtle. The physical environment has been entirely modified to reflect a specific cultural heritage.
The architecture shifts.
Right, the architecture shifts, the bilingual signage alters the visual landscape, and the public squares are designed for entirely different types of community gathering. The physical flow of the community is fundamentally altered. That physical transformation is placemaking,
And then we have the software side, right? Sense of place.
the emotional side.
Yeah, if placemaking is about the bricks and the mortar, sense of place is about the emotional aura attached to those bricks. It describes the psychological act of filling a geographical location with deep meaning and significance.
It's that highly specific feel that a person or a group of people has for a location.
And it's interesting because this sense of place operates on wildly different scales.
Massively different scales. On a personal sort of micro scale, a sense of place could simply be the profound emotional connection you have to the family home where you were raised. I mean, to the Postal Service, it's just a house on a street. It's just wood and glass. But to you, it is completely saturated with memory. A scratch on the floorboards or a specific tree in the front yard holds immense personal gravity.
But then this scales up, right? On a macro regional scale, a sense of place is the distinct, globally recognized identity of a city like Paris.
Right.
Millions of people around the world who have never even set foot in France have a firmly established sense of place regarding Paris. They associate those specific geographic coordinates with romance, with art, cafe culture, and a very specific historical weight.
What's fascinating here is how humans inevitably attach deep significance to mere geographical coordinates. A latitude and a longitude mean absolutely nothing on their own.
Right, it's just a spot on a map.
It's just dirt, rock, and weather.
Yeah.
But human psychology compels us to drape our values, our historical memories, and our identities over that physical space until it becomes sacred to us. We simply cannot leave a blank space blank.
Which brings us to the next massive concept. If human identity is constantly shaping the physical landscape, what actually makes up that identity?
The briefing breaks this down really well.
It does. It outlines three core factors, three pillars that shape regional geographic patterns. Those pillars are language, religion, and ethnicity.
Let's look at language first.
Yeah, let's tackle the first pillar. There is a brilliant phrase used to describe language in this context from the source text. It calls language a giant freight container that carries culture.
It's a perfect metaphor. Think about what a physical freight container actually does. It doesn't just transport single items. It transports entire systems of goods that society needs to function and survive. Language operates the exact same way. It isn't just a vehicle for transporting vocabulary from one brain to another.
It carries so much more.
Right. It carries a culture's idioms, its historical context, shared jokes, agricultural history, and its specific way of viewing time and authority. Because it carries so much cultural weight, language serves as a primary marker of identity, making geographic places incredibly distinct.
So the spatial distribution of language is essentially a massive, visible map of human migration and historical conquest.
Absolutely.
When we look at the dominance of the Spanish language across Latin America, we aren't just looking at a random linguistic preference. That linguistic map is a direct physical reflection of the region's colonial history with Spain.
The Spanish language clustered there because centuries of historical conquest dictated it.
Right, dropping massive cultural freight containers onto the landscape and reshaping the cognitive geography of an entire continent.
And that macro-level historical clustering creates a shared sense of place across vast stretches of land. But the geography of language is just as powerful when we zoom all the way in.
Oh, definitely.
It drills down into much smaller, highly protective regional identities.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Variations within a single language dialects. They create these fiercely localized identities. We can use the United States as a perfect geographic case study here, specifically looking at how different regions handle the plural form of the word you. Depending on where you are standing on the map, the geography of that single concept changes entirely.
It really does.
Down in the American South, the plural of you is y'all. If you travel up to the Midwest, the regional dialect shifts to you guys. But if you drive into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the highly localized dialect uses the word yints.
Yeah, and when you sit down in a diner and hear someone say yints, you instantly know exactly where you are in the world.
Exactly.
That dialect is a geographic coordinate all on its own. It instantly creates an in-group and an out-group based purely on regional vocabulary. It signals to everyone in the room who is local and who is just passing through.
So language builds these incredible cultural boundaries, but it's not the only force physically reshaping our world. When you look at how people organize their towns and cities, the second pillar, religion, leaves just as massive of a footprint.
Oh, religion is a huge driver of spatial organization.
Yeah. Religious beliefs are incredibly powerful geographic forces because they dictate exactly how people organize and modify their built environment. Religion physically manifests on the earth through the creation of what geographers call sacred spaces.
Right. People fundamentally alter their environment by building churches, temples, mosques, or shrines. And these structures are rarely designed to blend in.
No, they're designed to be seen.
They were designed to stand out. They become massive physical landmarks that anchor the cultural landscape. And just like the linguistic maps we discussed, the spatial organization of these sacred spaces leaves a historical breadcrumb trail.
Let's follow that trail across the United States for a second. The built environment of Christianity shows distinct, easily traceable regional variations depending on the geography and history of the area. Up in the Northeast, you see a massive historical presence of Congregationalism. The towns there were shaped by English settlers arriving in the 1600s. They brought a specific organizational structure across the Atlantic, deliberately building their new settlements closely clustered around a central meeting house.
It was practical.
Exactly. It was a spatial design built for tight-knit community survival in a harsh, unfamiliar climate.
But then when you look at the American South, the geographic landscape of religion changes completely. You see incredibly high concentrations of Baptists and Methodists. The spatial organization is entirely different from those clustered New England towns.
Because the geography demanded a different approach. The religious expansion in the South was historically driven by traveling preachers moving across a sprawling, highly rural and spread out agricultural landscape.
Right.
This centralized meeting house model just didn't work there. The religion had to physically travel to the people, resulting in a completely different architectural and organizational footprint across the southern map.
And we see this powerful spatial organization on a global scale, of course. Islam acts as the dominant cultural and physical marker across the Middle East, heavily dictating the intricate architecture, the layout of cities, and the orientation of daily life. Meanwhile, Hinduism is the primary religious influence shaping the sprawling, vibrant landscape of India. If we connect this to the bigger picture, religion is arguably the most powerful mechanism humans possess for physically reshaping the earth to reflect their divine beliefs.
Wow, yeah.
They are attempting to build a reflection of heaven on the physical earth, which leaves a permanent geographical legacy.
That brings us to our third pillar of identity, ethnicity. We define ethnicity here as a common cultural background that fosters a deep sense of belonging. But again, we aren't talking about a purely internal feeling.
No, we're analyzing how that shared background physically alters a location.
Right. Ethnic groups invariably build specific, tangible infrastructure to support their identity and to integrate safely into a broader community.
If a group is going to maintain a shared cultural heritage in a brand new geographic location, they require physical spaces. They need places to gather, to educate their children, and to practice their traditions without the threat of cultural dissolution.
The briefing has a fantastic specific example of this placemaking in action: the Somali immigrant population in Minnesota.
That's a great example.
When this group arrived in the American Midwest, they were faced with a profound environmental and cultural contrast. They didn't simply assimilate invisibly into the existing Midwestern landscape. They engaged in highly active placemaking. They established a mosque, but it was far more than just a house of worship. This physical building was specifically designed to function simultaneously as a religious center, a school, and a comprehensive community hub.
It operates as a multi-purpose survival mechanism. In a sprawling, physically freezing, and culturally unfamiliar Midwestern landscape, building a centralized structure where the language, the daily prayers, and the community support systems are all housed together, that is an act of geographic anchoring.
Just imagine the sheer shock of that transition for a second. If you move somewhere with totally different weather, totally different customs, how do you adapt? By building that infrastructure, that immigrant population is firmly embedding their group's identity into the local Minnesota dirt.
Exactly.
They are taking a physically and culturally foreign space and actively transforming a piece of it into a supportive, authentic, localized hub. They are literally building belonging from the ground up.
And this active transition of space is where human geography becomes truly dynamic. We have established that humans use language, religion, and ethnicity to build and define their landscapes. But what happens when different groups with entirely different landscapes and identities are forced to interact within the same borders?
So what does this all mean? How do geographers actually measure the societal friction that occurs when all these different identities share the exact same planet?
Right.
To understand this, we use two critical terms borrowed directly from physics but applied to human societies: centripetal forces and centrifugal forces.
Let's visualize this using the physics metaphor. Imagine a spinning merry-go-round. Centripetal force is the energy that pulls everything inward toward the center pole. It keeps you stable, grounded, and moving as one cohesive unit. In human geography, centripetal forces are the unifying cultural factors that bind a society together. They strengthen social cohesion, they stabilize borders, and they build a unified national identity.
Let's look at how our three pillars act as these unifying centripetal forces. First, using religion, the briefing points out that Hinduism serves as a massive binding force for the population of India. Following the end of British colonial rule, that shared religious identity acted as a powerful centripetal force, pulling a massive, highly diverse population toward a centralized national identity. Second, looking at language. The shared use of Spanish across Central America acts as a massive centripetal force. It unifies a vast geographic region, allowing for seamless communication, economic trade, and shared cultural understanding, completely overriding very real local and national differences.
And third, looking at ethnicity. We can point to the Han ethnicity in China. Because the Han make up over 90% of the Chinese population, that deeply shared ethnic heritage acts as a powerful unifying force. It pulls the society inward, helping to maintain a remarkably consistent cultural heritage across an incredibly vast and varied geographic expanse.
So those are the forces that build and stabilize nations, but physics dictates that every force has an opposing reaction. If centripetal forces pull inward, centrifugal forces are the energy that flings things outward, off the edge of the merry-go-round.
Right.
Centrifugal forces are the dividing factors in a society. These are the cultural frictions that divide people, cause regional conflict, or lead directly to separatism. They pull societies apart, pushing groups aggressively away from the center.
And it's vital to note that the exact same pillars of identity, religion, language, and ethnicity can act as either unifying or dividing forces, depending entirely on the historical and geographic context.
Exactly. And just to be completely clear for you listening, we are going to examine these centrifugal examples impartially, purely as observational case studies from the source text, to understand the mechanics of societal division. We aren't taking any political sides here.
Absolutely, just looking at the geographic reality.
Let's look at religion acting as a centrifugal dividing force. A prime geographic example provided is the ancient division between the Sunni and Shia sects of Islam. This is a conflict that originated centuries ago over a deeply theological dispute regarding the rightful successor to the Prophet Muhammad.
Mhm.
Geographically, that theological dispute has acted as a massive centrifugal force, causing intense historical friction, drawing hard borders, and creating geographic fragmentation across the Middle East for centuries.
Turning to language as a dividing force, we can observe the recurring efforts within the United States to pass English-only legislation at the state or local levels. From a strictly geographical perspective, these legislative efforts frequently arise in areas experiencing rapid demographic shifts, places where speakers of the dominant language perceive a threat from growing minority populations speaking other languages, most notably Spanish. The resulting friction over which language is permitted to dominate the public space, the schools, and the government buildings, that becomes a potent centrifugal force, driving political and social wedges into the community.
Finally, we examine ethnicity acting as a catastrophic centrifugal force, using the deeply tragic events in Rwanda in 1994. The historical geography here is critical to understand.
Yes.
Colonial powers occupying the region historically manipulated and intentionally exacerbated existing ethnic distinctions between the Hutu and the Tutsi populations to maintain control. This colonial interference deepened the ethnic divide over decades until it became an uncontrollable centrifugal force, systematically tearing the society apart and eventually culminating in the horrific genocide of the Tutsis.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? It highlights a profound paradox at the heart of human geography.
It really does.
The exact same cultural tools, the specific way a group prays, the dialect they speak, the deep ancestry they share, contain the potential energy to both build a thriving, deeply unified nation or to completely fracture a society into pieces. Geography is never just about where a river or a mountain is located.
No?
It is about measuring the incredible tension between the forces that bind humanity together and the forces that break us apart.
It provides a completely new lens for understanding global news. You stop seeing random conflicts and start seeing the physics of culture at work.
Exactly.
To bring all of this together, our briefing concludes by stepping back and looking at the visible global landscape as a whole. When you combine language, religion, ethnicity, and one additional factor, gender roles, you get the highly visible physical world that we navigate every day.
These elements are not abstract concepts floating in the academic ether. They are highly tangible.
Look at the architecture of a city skyline. The distinct religious domes, the towering spires, the varying styles of residential housing, that is human identity made physical. Look at global food practices.
Oh, food is a great example.
The distinct regional culinary traditions you encounter as you travel are essentially edible maps of cultural history, dictating agricultural layouts and supply chains. The spatial organization of society even extends to urban versus rural differences. Variations in gender roles, family structures, and workforce participation often differ significantly between dense city centers and sprawling country settings, fundamentally altering the social geography of those specific spaces.
And we cannot overlook the final overarching factor here, historical legacy. You simply cannot understand the modern physical landscape without understanding exactly who conquered, who colonized, or who settled that specific dirt centuries ago.
Right?
The colonial histories of the world, like a French establishing deep linguistic and cultural roots in Quebec, or the English imposing their systems across the rest of the U.S. and Canada, continue to aggressively dictate modern social patterns today. The invisible borders drawn by empires hundreds of years ago are still actively functioning as centripetal and centrifugal forces in our modern era.
So, why does all of this matter for you? Why should you care about the mechanics of placemaking, or the spatial footprint of traveling preachers, or the physics of centripetal and centrifugal cultural forces?
Because it changes how you see the world.
Because mastering these geographical concepts fundamentally empowers you. It elevates you from being a passive observer of the world to an active, informed analyst. When you look at a region now, you aren't just looking at a static map. You can actively predict its cultural stability. You can look at the overlapping boundaries of different languages and religions and spot the potential for centrifugal conflict long before it makes the evening news. Or, conversely, you can understand the deep-rooted centripetal reasons why a specific region remains so incredibly unified despite external pressures.
You are learning to read the language of the landscape itself. And as we wrap up our analysis of this material, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive discussing how human identity relies heavily on modifying physical landscapes. We lay down bricks, we draw hard borders, we build community centers in the freezing cold to prove who we are and where we belong.
Right.
But humanity is rapidly shifting into virtual reality and digital communities. We are currently building entirely new, geography-less cultural landscapes on the internet. So the question becomes, how will human beings establish a true sense of place when there is absolutely no physical place to modify?
Wow.
Will those digital spaces develop their own sacred architectures and rigid linguistic borders? And perhaps most importantly, as we spend increasing amounts of our lives in the digital ether, will those virtual spaces generate their own massive centripetal and centrifugal forces that eventually spill back out, reshaping our physical world all over again?
The geography of the internet. That is an incredibly wild concept to ponder.
It really makes you think.
Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive. We want to thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the physical footprint of human identity. Keep looking closely at the spaces around you, keep asking why the world is built the exact way that it is, and keep exploring. Until next time.